Rob, welcome back. How are things going?
Hey Brandon, very very busy week actually for me, incredibly busy. So which all bodes well. But yeah, happy to be back, and we've got a long backlog of questions, which I don't think we've got time to get to this week. But let's give it a great crack, and I'll see if I can do it in rapid fire
All
mode as
right,
well.
we'll give it a shot. But the first thing that I want to touch on isn't a community question. It's actually some news that came out today about Vera. Now, that's the registry body for the carbon credit markets. And I just wanted to get your take on it because I know you were really involved with that early on, and I'm sure you've been following it closely.
Yeah, and still pretty involved in with some of the projects that I'm working with. It was actually overnight for me, so there was a community call that Wes called at about midnight or something, and for me to announce this, it's been under wraps for quite some time because, as you can imagine, quite a few parties have been needing to be lined up. There's kind of internal sign off and everything. But yeah, the announcement overnight was that Vera, which is one of the world's largest and most used standards and registry bodies for the carbon markets, is integrating with the Hedera Guardian, which is massive because that means that pretty much every carbon credit that in future goes through Vera's registry or standards body and registry has the opportunity to use the digital measurement reporting and verification DMRV aspects of the Project Guardian. Credits can be tokenized on the Hedera Guardian, and part of the vision the Foundation Sustainable Impact Fund and Wes in particular have been pushing is this kind of open sourcing of methodologies to lower the bar to projects kind of onboarding these carbon credits, not just carbon credits, it's biodiversity credits, notion of stacking credits as well. So, when you put a project together, you don't just get the carbon, you actually, by managing the land correctly, you improve habitats, you protect species and everything else. So this is a big deal. The Vera Project Hub is the place where it's being integrated, it appears. Let's do a full deep dive on it next week. And I think hopefully if we can get some of the Vera and Wes and others on the show, we can talk about it in detail. And this is coupled with Olcott. I mean, we've been talking about Olcott for some time, bringing 500 million tons of carbon to the Guardian platform. This is interlinked with that. So Olcott, a big project developer, they use Vera as their registry and standards body, and they have got some really exciting projects going on in Africa in particular, but also globally. So there's a kind of a virtuous circle here where all these parties are now coming together, and they're all delivering these projects via Vera's plugins into the Hedera Guardian. So I couldn't be more excited and more congratulatory for Wes and the team, because I know how hard this has been and how long they've been working on it. So yeah, kudos to all of them.
And Rob, I went through some of the stats as I opened my show today. Vera is over 60% of the carbon credit market.
Mm.
And the market is already $1 trillion here in 2025 and is expected to grow to $16 trillion by 2034. So the
Yeah.
fact that we're getting this kind of foothold could have tremendous impacts to the Hedera network here in years to come.
Absolutely, and the irrespective of what's happening in the US and the current administration's view of this, the rest of the world is still tracking to kind of a net zero outcome. And these markets are, firstly, they're recognizing that there's a need for these DMRV solutions and the verification and validation that is necessary to bring trust to the markets, which is exactly what the mission of the Hedera Guardian is. But also, it's not slowing down; it's accelerating. And so, yes, those numbers are definitely targets that we're kind of accelerating towards.
So, a very positive development there. I do want to get your take. You already kind of told me before we started the show that you didn't know too much about it, but just to give us some context, since you are in that payments and stablecoin world, we've been celebrating the fact that we've been seeing the liquidity, the USDC liquidity on
Mm.
Hedera going up really rapidly. And during my last show, it peaked out at about $214 million worth of USDC. Now, we didn't know what was actually causing causing that, or any of the mechanisms behind it, why it was actually happening. But during this week, that has dropped down to 46 million. Now, we've seen similar things happen on Algorand and other networks as well, but a lot of the other ones have stayed stable. Now, there's also a lot of big news around Circle, the issuer, of course, of USDC, around how they're going to IPO. So I have no clue what's going on or why it's coming down. But what are your thoughts around the rise that we saw and then the subsequent decline that we've seen, just to put it into context for us?
Yeah, I really have no idea. I mean, it's one of these things that there are obviously some big players here. I don't think this is all driven by the utility on the platforms, because our decentralized applications aren't using USDC yet. I mean, apart from our DeFi ecosystem, that will come in time. So it can only be the movement of, and I've not looked at the wallets, so I don't know, the degree to which these are big chunks of movement. But I think it's to be expected, to be honest. I don't think there's anything necessarily to be concerned about. It's just the nature of the utility or the usage of USDC and stablecoins in general. So this week we might be talking about another all-time high. So I don't know is the answer.
I think just some patience, and then we'll try to figure it out over time. And like we've said before, USDC and stablecoins in general are going to be a tremendous tool, and Hedera is going to have a lot of things going for it to hopefully outcompete in some of those payment spaces. But Rob, let's jump in.
And I was at a Swift conference. I was on a panel at the Swift conference yesterday, and stablecoins were pretty much that and AI, of course, were the topics du jour. They were the things that everyone wanted to talk about. So this isn't going away. It's it's growing, and it's growing at pace. The Genius bill and Stable bill and the market infrastructure bills. That there's so many positive tailwinds to the stablecoin space. We just need to see how it tracks over time.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense. So I'm going to try. We have about 20 minutes left. We're going to try to get through as many of these community questions as we can. The first one comes from Jamal, who asked a question about the governing council. Are there any companies or institutions that have gone through the approval process and have been accepted, but who simply haven't themselves announced yet?
Yes.
Simple answer. All right.
Yep.
All right. Well, this might be a lot easier to get through than I thought, Rob. So the next one comes from Kevo, who says, if Hedera were to win and be the main CBDC and AUDD backbone for Australia, what kind of TPS metrics would be expected? Same question for PHPX. What's the anticipated transaction volume on Hedera from these kinds of CBDC and stablecoin use cases where whole countries are involved?
It's simply impossible to predict that. We have payments metrics here in Australia, of course. AP Plus is the payments operator for all the payment schemes here in Australia. But it depends, right? It depends whether we're talking about retail payments, card payments, account-to-account payments, whether it's micro payments. But we are talking in the order of trillions probably of payment interactions over time, certainly billions, and the amount of value. You're just looking at one metric, TPS. As we've said, there are plenty of other metrics which better reflect the health of an economy, the health of an ecosystem such as this, and the platforms. These are big numbers. We could segment by retailer. We could segment by interaction type, such as in-store or online. We could segment by payment initiation type, whether it be QR code or whatever else. So we're not going to go all in immediately, but I imagine that there would be a foothold in some of those segments, and then we grow out from there. In Australia, we've got a very robust and well-established faster payment solution called the New Payments Platform, MPP. So there's no burning platform here. One of the challenges, I think, for people like me is actually establishing that foothold where there is no burning platform. So you need to look to new markets. You need to look at, to kind of threat modeling, what happens when stablecoins, are taken. USDC, for example, is taken by merchants in Australia, which, feasibly could happen. So there are all the sorts of things that we need to look at to establish where first to get started. But that's just Australia. It was an economy of 27 million people. Bigger economies, with different economic approaches, I guess. Some are far more focused on online sales. Some are far more progressive in their use of these new financial instruments and payments methods. So it's really difficult to model these things. And then, of course, the drivers are different per nation state. We've got fairly low cost of payment because we've got these new payments infrastructures, traditional payments infrastructures. So the drivers for change are different. If it's the reduction in the cost of unit payments, then that's a great driver for networks like Hedera, of course, which are super low cost. But payment systems tend to be collaborations between multiple parties, banks and payment service providers and merchants. So corralling all of those to actually make the changes, it takes time too. And it also obscures, I've been in the payments industry for over 30 years. Usually my first question I ask of any new client is, in this country, what are the unit costs of payment? How much does it cost to get, one payment from account to account or from merchant to account? Mostly it's not known, because there are too many parties in between. They're reducing costs. Some of it's absorbed by, within the business models of the participants in that value chain. So it's very difficult to know how you're driving down the cost of payments or where you're focusing or targeting that reduction. And that obviously leads into the use cases that you're deploying first. So all of these things contribute to, when you're looking at systemic change, overlaid with financial service provision, overlaid by risk and regulation, the business cases for these use cases are quite challenging. But as the questioner asks, volume is one of those criteria.
Well, Rob, one of the things that I think about with this is I do believe that all of the transactions that we're talking about, you don't want to just take the ones that we have right now and say, this is how many transactions are done, and this is, what we could aspire to get to. I do think that DLT is going to capture all the current market share as far as those transactions, because when you have something like Hedera that's 1,000 times more efficient than the traditional rails, you're going to eventually replace those things. But what's exciting to me is the fact that we're going to have all these other use cases that are made possible when things are that much cheaper. So you're going to have things like micropayments, like we've talked about significantly on here, or transactional Internet of Things, or smart cities, or whatever that may be. That's when we can see the real exponential growth in payments in general. So we're not looking at, payments that are being made now and just following the economy as they grow, but the fact that we could bring on so many more transactions.
Yeah, for sure. And it will probably come over the top, right? Yeah. It won't be the incumbents driving this change. It'll be the innovators and disruptors that we are seeing right now, doing just this. And then the incumbents will have to, race to catch up or, face into an existential threat. So, it's certainly really exciting times, and with this growth and these stablecoin tailwinds and everything else. Stablecoins become, it was always a spectrum of things rather than one specific type of use of the technology, depending on how stable the coins are and how they are backed. But now we're talking about tokenized money market funds that yield bearing. We're talking about retail CBDCs, although less so on the retail CBDC side. The range now, tokenized deposits is another form of this kind of digital money. Such a plethora of different types of digital money, and such a plethora of different ways of making payments and taking payments. Something's got to be in the middle. Something's got to coordinate and corral and interoperate and interconnect, because they'll be on different chains, they'll be on different providers, different countries under different jurisdictions. These things have to be. They're going to have to be a few real disruptors to actually move this forward, and then everyone else will race to catch up or kill it and try something else. But Very exciting times.
All right. May you live in interesting times. So the next one comes from Aaron B. 8350, who says, with regards to the RBA CBDC trial, can you comment on the three other potential use cases / crypto platforms? Will one reign king? Can you comment on how Hedera compares to the other three? Now, I think he's conflating two different things there, Rob, at least from what you explained last week. You said the use cases haven't been announced yet, but the platforms, that's what we were talking about last week, they have been announced. And one of those, of course, was Hedera. So I didn't want to,
Yeah.
I wanted to separate those two things out. But what are your thoughts about these other platforms that have been launched and how Hedera potentially stacks up?
Yeah, so in clarification. So what was announced, or what was made public, it wasn't announced, it was just in the minutes of the industry advisory group for the RBA, was that for Project Acacia and for the pilot projects that will be announced imminently, and I understand this is going to be probably next week or the week after, of the projects that are under consideration for real money pilots, so real money production pilots, which are time limited to the end of the year, of those projects, some of them have requested a wholesale CBDC as part of their use case. And the subset of the projects that are being considered have a range of different preferred private chains on which to issue these wholesale CBDCs. And that's the list. And that was a private Ethereum fork. It was a private version of Hedera. It was Red Belly, which is an Australian chain, and R3 Corda. So the intent of the RBA saying that was firstly to indicate the projects that are in the last stage of consideration, and secondly to prepare them because these are elements of the projects that are actually quite difficult to achieve. So to give us a bit of a heads up on how they intend to proceed. So those are the four, but the projects haven't been announced yet, and so some of those may be included, or all of them might be. There were other chains that were preferred by some of the other projects who had made submissions. So this is a very clear view that the RBA didn't want too many chains on which to issue wholesale CBDCs, or an indication that the projects have probably not made the cut into Project Acacia. So what do I think? I'm not here to throw mud at any other type of technology, and we're way past that anyway. Projects select technologies for a variety of reasons, and it's usually based on the skills and resources they have available to them, the experience they have in a use of a particular technology, or as an expedient. Remember, this is a limited time project, so the ones that that they should be focusing on their use case. They should be focusing on the learnings outcomes of Project Acacia, and not relearning a different technology in order that they could use it just for the wholesale CBDCs. That's not what this Project Acacia is about. It's all about institutional and wholesale tokenization of assets, and so only in some of these instances does a wholesale CBDC is required. And I'm really interested to see why these projects think that a wholesale CBDC is required, because there are a variety of settlement models that we're testing, i.e., digital money for digital assets, and how does that actually settle? And of those 5 settlement models, only a couple are backed by CBDCs. So it's interesting to see what's happening. Of the choices, I think there's a range of reasons. Obviously, Ethereum has been the kind of preferred choice for some of the stablecoin issuers and other parties. And in fact, that was what was used previously in the CBDC pilot 2 years ago. So this is a private Ethereum fork. It's just, Ethereum's open source, so it's very straightforward to stand up, a few nodes and call it a private Ethereum fork, and then publish your ERC20 style CBDCs onto it. And I suspect some of the project participants are just reusing what they used 2 years ago in the CBDC pilot. So that's kind of a natural flow. Hedera is obviously a preferred technology for our submissions, but there are a variety of project collaborators and participants within our range of projects that would utilize that. So although it just says one on there, there are a variety of different projects that are keen on looking at what that looks like, and we're using, or we have proposed, HashSphere because that's the natural way of proceeding. Red Belly I know very little about. It is an Australian initiative that's come out of the RMIT, which is one of our main academic institutions here in Australia. It had a public launch, and although it says it's a public network, I suspect they do have the notion of subnets or shards. So I suspect it's a case where the RBA can identify all the nodes, and they're all kind of in Australia. And should they need to pull the plug, they're able to do that. And finally, R3 Corda, which is well established in terms of cross-border payments and and other use cases. So I think that's why that would have been chosen. So I think time will tell fairly soon as well. And I'm really looking forward to figuring out where all these, because we don't know, right? We don't know who the other project submissions are. And the curation of that has been done by the RBA. So I think when the announcement's made in the next week or so, we'll find out more. And then where those use cases all fit together.
Well, we're looking forward to it as well. Rob, I can't believe it. We're almost out of time here, but I'm going to try to fit one more in here. It comes from Quasimodo, who says, there's a lot of news about RWAs being tokenized on Hedera, but the transaction data doesn't move much. Does the tokenizing process produce transaction fees? Are there no transaction fees until the RWA tokens are sold or redeemed in some fashion?
Well, it's not a high volume use case. It's a real world asset tokenization until we get to a point where maybe we have, buildings that are REIT type use cases where we've got massive fractionalization and lots of trading of those fractions. And even then, that's not really high volume. So where we are, I think, in the kind of the maturation of real world asset tokenization use cases is merely the tokenization of a real world asset. That's kind of one transaction, or just a handful of transactions if it's follows the normal life cycle of tokenization, issuance, settlement, and then something held in one's wallet or whatever. You're not trading them, 3-4 times a day. You're not actually, and haven't got massive scale yet on these tokens. So I don't think you necessarily see it, and it wouldn't actually make any difference at the moment to the TPS. I think over time it certainly will. The other thing is things like carbon credits tend to be issued and then purchased and retired almost immediately. So again, it's a very short life cycle, and you don't get lots of ongoing traffic because of it. It will add to the TVL. It will add to the total value represented, and things like RWA XYZ should actually start to track and reflect these tokenizations. But in terms of TPS at the moment, I think it's very low.
Well, one of the things, Rob, along those lines is the carbon markets aren't very mature yet. So we don't see a lot of trading, but just like I was saying before, it's $1 trillion market now, projected to go to 16 trillion by 2034. We could see, high frequency trading getting involved, whatever it may be. What you're talking about is what we're seeing now. But as that market matures, we could see a lot more activity.
For sure. And the, I think the global, across all asset classes globally, it's about 300 trillion. So, there's I think it's 280 trillion or something last year, that, depending on which report you read. So if you believe that in the future, everything is going to be tokenized, which of course we do, that's a 300 trillion addressable market in terms of value. Then you need digital money to acquire or settle for digital assets. So that's where the stable coin and other forms of digital money usage surges. So then you've got two tokens. And then you've got fractionalization, et cetera, et cetera. So I think McKinsey recently said that they expected 2 trillion, base case, 2 trillion of assets on chain by 2030. So that's 2 trillion of 300 trillion. There's still a long way to go. I think that's a pessimistic case. I think it's actually accelerating faster than that. These won't all be on the same chain. So, of course, you've got cross-chain movements. You've got the movement of liquidity around in order to get to the chain in which you're going to acquire the asset. If you think about, I think Dubai alone has about 2 trillion assets under management, and they're planning on 50% of those to be on chain within a similar time frame. I think 2033. So this is a movement that is only accelerating, and the tokenization of assets has to be coupled by the growth in the liquidity required to do that. So going back to the earlier question about USDC on Hedera, we're only starting. We're only literally at the beginning of this particular journey. At the moment, there's very little to do with USDC. I mean, maybe a cross-border payment or some DeFi activity. But when these massive markets start tokenizing, as they are right now, real estate and bonds and fixed income, and carbon and securities, etc., when all of that starts coming on chain, that's when things get super, super exciting.
Absolutely. Well, Rob, I see it is time for you to go already. I know you have another meeting, but we appreciate you coming on, and we'll see you next week.
Absolutely. And let's talk about that Vera announcement a bit more tomorrow, next week.